game of business resilience. Because many of you, I know, are really focused on disaster recovery and disaster prevention from the standpoint of the hardware and the software and the hackers and that. And this is more about those things you don't have control over that you need to know about and you need to anticipate for your clients. Because your clients are not going to be happy if all you can do is recover their data and they got no business for the data to be used to run. And so part of this is helping you understand what the risks and threats are. If anybody can't hear me, just let me know. I'll use the mic if I have to, but I'm not a good mic user. Okay. Just want to let everybody know this is Tony Gelish's view of the world, so if you take umbrage with anything I say, it's me, not my firm, not any of my clients or anything like that. Everything you're going to see I got from open source, so there's no information here that you couldn't have gotten if you were industrious. This is all I'm going to quickly go through. This section is large, and I'm going to fly through it because all I want to do is expose you to some of the risks that are out there that you may not be paying attention to, and then walk you through how you can help your client use a relatively objective process to identify where they ought to spend their money on business resilience. So this is where we've gone through this whole process. All of this really wasn't a big deal until we had 9/11, and then everybody was like, oh my God, we never thought about this, we need to think about this, we've got some big things that happened, we could have worse things. And so then they admired the problem for a long time. And then they passed this national security directive that said, you have to develop business resiliency solutions. We can't allow the economy to go in the dumper just because somebody does something bad to us. As you all know, the economy really suffered after 9/11. Well, then we got to preparation. So now we've dithered away several years and still haven't gotten anything fixed. It's now 2011, so it's still broke out there. We still have business resiliency problems. We put a patch on it with the color code system. When we used to have the color code system, I used to point out that we'll always be at Burke, we'll never go back down to Cookie Monster, and we'll never go up to Elmo, because if we're at Elmo, pretty much it's the end of the world as we know it, so we really don't care at that point. So my feelings about the color code is it was never a very valuable tool. Where we are today is maintenance and relapse prevention. People have stopped paying attention to the risks from business resiliency. How many of you are following the fires on the mainland? And you should all be following the fires on the mainland. Do you know how many broadcast towers are out in those deserts in New Mexico, and California, and Colorado? Do you know how many fiber optic cables run through those uncharted backwoods areas? All that stuff is sitting out there. Several years ago, there was a fire in Arizona, and it took out an electrical transformer that happened to be significant in powering the data hotel that's in Los Angeles on Wilshire Boulevard, One Wilshire. And so One Wilshire was in a brownout phase. That's not good, since our data from here goes through the One Wilshire plant in Los Angeles. But I suspect nobody here was following the fact that that transformer burned up. It was the only one of its kind in the world, and they had to build a new one. And so in the meantime, they had to reroute power. It took days. I'll let you read this, but this is the big concern now. It's I'm going to talk about it later more of it, the SCADA attacks, the disruption to normal services through any kind of attack. Could be physical attack, kinetic. It could be somebody with white powder and envelopes, all those kinds of things that your client is going to say, my computer's in there and I can't back up my server because the police have this squared off because there's white powder all over the place. That actually, the backup server part didn't happen. That happened here in Honolulu. A truck delivered several cartons of pre-printed material that was printed overseas in the Middle East. And when they unloaded them and dropped them on the ground as they were unpacking them, a white powder flew out and they shut down downtown Honolulu. Well, it was talcum powder, so the ink wouldn't stick together on the magazines that were in the boxes. But for 4 hours, there was no business being conducted in downtown Honolulu. That's the kind of stuff. So I'm going to talk about 4 markets and 18 critical infrastructure sectors. This is the stuff we're going to fly through. sector. Some of them weren't even alive when this happened, but this was caused by pine trees not being cut back in Ohio, and it took out most of the eastern seaboard, as you can see between these two maps. If you drive around Oahu, you'll look and you'll see trees and things growing up close to high-tension power lines. The good news is we don't have a lot of lightning and thunderstorms here. The bad news is we have fires here, and you can have the same problem from it. But that caused a tremendous cascading effect just because the Ohio Power Authority decided to save money by not trimming their trees off and off their power lines. Power lines heated up. It was a very hot summer, which we're having again on the mainland. The wires sag, touch the trees grounded, power grid out. We have similar risks here in Hawaii. We have many single point failures. I used to show a map. PICO here on Oahu was very gracious in posting on their website for a long time a complete map of their entire physical and logical power grid, so you can see where all the single points of failure were. The good news is they took it down, but they still exist. One of the problems with power, and we'll talk more about this later, is that your water pressure above 4 floors, there isn't any. It's created by tanks on the roof. The city only pumps up to 4 floors. When you lose power, you lose water pressure. And I'll talk later about why that's important. So there's a number of cascading effects. Backup power interdependencies. People don't have refueling plans. It's like, oh yeah, we got 3 days worth of fuel. Does everybody know how long it was before they were able to move fuel into New Orleans? It's over 45 days before a tanker truck got into New Orleans. If you're running a backup generator, you've been out of power for 40 days. They didn't have that much of a problem because most of their generators were below grade, and when the water came in, their generators were covered with water, so they didn't run anyway. But those are the kinds of things you have to think about. Where are you going to get all this stuff to keep these generators running and service these UPS systems? Chilled water. If the power's out and you've got chilled water cooling for your servers, or excuse me, for your power supplies, your backup generators, you're down because you don't have water and the generators are overheating. I think all of us who live here in Hawaii know how vulnerable we are to the straits and the fuel that's moving through there. That's one of the things again, for your clients, you should be watching. Southwest Airlines is a real good example. They made a bet that there were going to be problems with the Straits of Hormuz as we started getting more and more oil from there. And they bought a slew full of fuel futures. And one of the reasons Southwest Airlines continues to be a less expensive airline is they're still spending those fuel futures and at very low prices compared to the rest of the industry. Smart, risky move. Here on Oahu, we have some interesting problems. We have 2 refineries, that's it. We have 2 offload buoys off of Campbell Industrial Park. They are both out in the middle of the ocean, unguarded. We're relying on the tanker ships getting here, and we have no backup. If a ship damages one of those buoys or somebody damages one of those buoys, we have to wait until it comes from the mainland. And I used to know how much fuel we had on the island, but I don't know anymore. They built more tanks, but we don't have a lot. Chemical sector. This is less of a problem for us, but one of the things to note, again, from the standpoint of your clients and disaster recovery is they're very dependent on Los Angeles and Long Beach. They're very dependent on Florida and the Gulf Coast. They're very dependent on New England and the East Coast for all of the chemical support. So again, if there's a SCADA attack and it takes out Long Beach, or if there's a power failure, I'm going to talk about that in a little while, specific to Long Beach, that affects the chemical business. Pretty much, you're all familiar with Fukushima and what happened there. And everybody's like, well, that happened in Japan. Thank God it didn't happen here. We have a little bit of we don't have nuclear power in Hawaii. So, not a big deal for us. We had a little tsunami that did some damage on Big Island, a little bit here. Wasn't that traumatic. Well, guess what? San Onofre nuclear power plant. Does anybody know how long it's been offline because it leaked? It's been offline since January. Today, the power company announced that they're concerned that because of the very hot summer they're having, that they may start doing brownouts in Southern California. How does it affect us? That's where our cable landings are. That's where our One Wilshire Boulevard hotel, telehotel is. All of those things will impact us out here if they start doing brownouts and rolling power outs. And this is just an example of what was I took the dimensions of the Fukushima that they were using for the plotting. I didn't do any plume plotting. I just did straight plotting as though there was no wind. This is the dead zone if San Onofre were to blow up. And this is the contamination zone. You may notice that Long Beach, you may notice that Long Beach is right here, which is where all the cargo goes in and out. It's where the chemicals go in and out. It's where the fuel goes in and out. It's where most of what comes to Hawaii goes in and out. And so San Onofre is an important link for business resiliency. I don't have a lot to share about this, simply because I'm not that familiar with these kinds of industries, and I haven't done a lot of work for these kinds of industries. But manufacturing obviously will be impacted by potential attacks. And I'll show you later what the most the most probable attacks are. Production industries, this is the most logical industrial attack right here. Intellectual capital theft. No offense to anybody, the Chinese are stealing from us left and right. I forget what the hack is now, but they hacked into somebody and stole 100% of their intellectual capital. It was Google that had an agreement with China, with China's, if I remember that story, it happened recently. They had a sharing agreement with the equivalent of Google in China. And what Google in China did, and it has a different name, is they stole the next version of all of Google's software. This is where we have a huge risk to our industries, is intellectual capital theft, and it's going on all the time. Dams, obviously, they have economic and environmental risks. This is downtown Nolens after the dikes gave way. This is the Kolobo Dam over on Kauai that gave way and killed a bunch of people. I don't know which dam this was. This looks like the one in near Las Vegas. But anyway, it's something else that you should be watching when there's rain problems. Duluth this morning was inundated, and most of Duluth was flooded. Not a big risk for us today until I tell you about some of the risks from more power that we have to worry about here in Hawaii. Agricultural issues. Does anybody know where 90% of the queen bees in the world come from? Big Island. Yep, Big Island. So this bee colony collapse that's going on has a huge risk. Most of our produce requires pollination by bees, and they actually sell these queen bees to create colonies on the mainland to fertilize fields, cross-pollinate fields. Well, there's a huge problem with it right now. It's affecting our economy. And then we've all probably exhausted about hearing about avian influenza. I know I am. I wish it would either kill us all or go away. I'm kind of a fatalist, in case you didn't notice. Water, I'm less concerned about water from a pure attack standpoint. I'm more concerned about the fact that we use it for cooling of server farms, cooling of backup generators, and those kinds of things. But with SCADA attacks now being so prevalent, a cyber attack can create situations where they can cross pipeline systems, and they can contaminate the water with a fossil fuel of some kind and make it flammable and certainly not drinkable. Everybody who lives here knows about the LOI sewage canal. Did you realize it was 6 years ago and it's still not fixed? They're just taking 2 pipes out, I guess, this week and moving one over to the side of the canal. 6 years from one sewage spill? Chlorine gas-enhanced IEDs, thefts of chlorine gas from water treatment plants. Huge. For a while, it used to be nitrate fertilizer because they were using it to build bombs. Now they're stealing chlorine gas to enhance IEDs. Not good. Talked about cooling systems. Most of them, this is a traditional chilled water system. If your clients are using chilled water systems to cool their physical plant and cool their server farms, You should know about those and know how they run, and are they on backup power? Are they hooked up to SCADA systems? Who maintains them? Because again, if you back up that data and you come back and say, hey, I got the tapes. Too bad about the fact that the room's 110 degrees and the server's overheating. You've got to have that knowledge to share with them and use it as part of your calculus. Don't get any of this. In my day job, I'm the infectious disease risk analyst for operations up at U.S. Pacific Command. And what I tell people is sneeze in your sleeve, stay home if you're sick, get your flu shot, and you'll pretty much be all right. And then I'm done. That's all I have to do. But things like coqui frogs. Everybody familiar with coqui frogs on Big Island? They're now impacting tourism on the Hilo side. Anybody been there? Yeah, it's loud. It's way loud. I heard an interview last night on the radio on one of the AM talk stations, and the gentleman who was being interviewed, you could hear, he was in Hilo, you could hear the coqui frogs in the background in his house. So these have potential risks to your clients. I used to do Federal Information Systems Management Act accreditations for computer systems. And one of the things we would always do is watch how they worked one day, and then we would kill those people with some kind of disease during the scenario. And we'd find out that only one guy knew how to restore the tapes. Only one guy knew how to change hard drives. Only one guy knew where this was. And so this disease thing is really important from the standpoint of taking out key personnel. Healthcare. This is one of the hospitals in Nolens. It's a charity hospital. It's still not open, still closed. All of their generators were in the basement. They lost all of their power instantly. A number of patients died here as a result of the fact that their respirators quit and the staff couldn't get them out because of the flooding. So these are all significant challenges. One of the things that's happened to us here in Honolulu is Hawaii Medical Center's closed. They went into bankruptcy and shut down. And so we have had a lot of diverts on ambulance services here in the island. Well, what does that mean to you? Well, it means your clients, if they are counting on healthcare service, are in a situation where they could end up with employees having to go a long distance to get healthcare here on the island. And if this happens, it causes those cascading problems of losing staff, losing time, creates a certain amount of risk. Service industries, there's a lot of those here. A lot of ATM hacking going on. I'm sure you're more aware of that than I am. I'm sure you're paying attention to that. It's very common. They just busted a guy in San Antonio who created an undetectable scammer. So if you go to San Antonio now, you will see stickers on every seam on every pump. And you'll see signs that say, if any of these stickers are broken, don't use this pump. So what these guys would do is they'd pull up in a big white van, they'd slide the door open, they'd pop the lid, they'd take this special skimmer they designed, they'd slip it on, and then they'd close the lid and walk away. Well, you can't tell from the outside that that skimmer's in there. And so they were pulling and broadcasting all of the credit card numbers and running up tremendous bills. They just busted them. So ATMs are really high risk. One of the things to remember is they require power, and most of us don't carry cash anymore. So when power goes down and you can't get cash, panic starts to set in, because how do you buy things? I don't know how many of you were here when one of the satellites for the point-of-sale systems got knocked out of alignment here in Hawaii, and you could not buy gasoline with a credit card at a number of gas stations here. And guess what? You walk inside to the person who's working at the gas station, no offense, but they're not road scholars in there. They don't know how to use embossing machines and paper stuff anymore. You didn't have cash, you couldn't buy gasoline there. And it was only about 2 or 3 days, but imagine if that had lasted a long time. Here's some of the things they're using. This is one of the typical skimmers that the 18-year-olds who are waiting at your table at Denny's use to steal your credit card information. I always find it amusing that people will come up to me and say, you buy things on the web, aren't you worried about your credit card getting stolen? And I'm like, you buy stuff in restaurants, aren't you worried about getting your credit card stolen? Because guess what? They take it, they walk away, they're gone for a long time, they come back. At least on the web, I have some idea where it went. But here's some other ones. This is the called the Lebanon Loop. They slip this thing, it's made out of X-ray film, they slip it into the slot so they don't have to modify the slot. it's nearly invisible once they've slipped it into the slot. When you push your card in, your card gets jammed up against a little dimple they've put in the tape, and then you can't get your card back out, and you think the machine ate your card, so you walk away. Then they come back and grab the tape and pull your card out. They've got your card. They've already shoulder searched it, so they've got your password. This is very common over in Asia. I just show this to show where the money's going for security and where opportunities might lie for those of you who are interested in doing business with the federal government on different things. As you can see, there's over $1 million in science and technology work. There's over $4 million in FEMA grants. This is fairly old information, it's last year, so I don't have the 2012 yet. But there's a lot of money out there, and they have lots of needs. The Theater of Security Absurdities, also known as TSA, is a prime example of an organization that could really use some computer help. This is kind of interesting. I realize nothing's 100% because we all know there was just that bust on the mainland where they found 7 guys who were taking bribes to let people in without badges. But the good news is they fired them. Bribery and corruption is just another TSA service. But less than 1% of the cargo and cargo air crews are inspected. So if you're moving stuff by air cargo, and somebody decides to put something on an air cargo plane and take your stuff out, it's relatively simple. Maritime cargo, they're a little over 2% now. They catch nuclear stuff pretty often. Unfortunately, most of it's cat litter. I don't know how many know cat litter is inherently radioactive, like bananas. So they mostly catch cat litter with shipments. Inland cargo and waterways, we don't have that here, but that's a big deal on the mainland. And then, of course, truck and cargo drivers, less than 1%. Plus, we have states like Illinois where they've been selling commercial driver's licenses to people who've never taken a test and aren't from this country and don't have citizenship. They finally got caught. But those kinds of things are going on all the time. Here's another case where you need to care. This happened in 2002. The ship foundered and blocked the Straits of Gibraltar. Now, we don't have anything going on in the Straits of Gibraltar, but any place you have a narrow harbor, there's a risk if something like this happens and blocks the harbor. This is one that we did have impact. They crashed outside and closed the Mississippi River. Again, I'll share with you later why that's important to us here in Hawaii and potentially to other folks. One of the other things to talk about that I don't have a picture for is every time a barge on the Mississippi runs into a bridge, you should immediately ask the question, I wonder if there's fiber optic cable on that bridge. Because most of them have fiber optic cable on them. If you go down into the metro in Washington, D.C. and look up, you'll see the fiber optic cable running on the tunnels. Most of the fiber optic cable in Washington, D.C. runs through the metro tunnels. So if you see a metro train have an accident and a fire, think about what would happen here if we had a similar incident. Piracy's become a big deal. This is all of the piracy this year since January. The red ones are where somebody got killed. The yellow ones is where they just got ransomed, or they're still being held. They haven't been released yet. But again, that impacts us and your clients as they're trying to plan their business. Terrestrial transportation, the interstate highway system, we have a lot of risk here. Some of you were undoubtedly here when the bridge came down because the Army guy drove a high vehicle into it, knocked down a pedestrian bridge, and took 10 hours to get home from Honolulu if you lived in Oak Beach, like I did. That pizza was really good, but I was really pissed about having to pay $30 for it. But I really appreciated coming down the other side of the H1 and selling it to us. That was pretty fun. But these kinds of things happen all the time. I was in Washington, D.C. when a fuel tanker truck crashed on the 270 and was under an overpass and melted the overpass, which was for $4.95, and closed that entire northwest corner of Washington, D.C. That kind of stuff can happen here and can happen elsewhere, and you need to be aware again of, is there fiber optic cable there that I should care about for my client, those kinds of things. This is one of my favorite pictures. I took this myself. This is a fossil fuel transport system out in Campbell Industrial Park on the west edge of this island. So you see here, and you can't hardly tell, but there's a chain there locking all these valves down. There's a big security light here. There's concertina wire around the top. There's a bollard here to prevent people from crashing lock on the gate. The pipes are labeled so that the emergency responders, if they have to come out there, know which is aviation fuel, which is regular fuel, all that kind of stuff. Very valuable information to know. Here's the exact same pipeline less than a quarter mile away. No berm, no fence. But the good news is they label all the pipes so I know which pipe I want to crack into. It's not this big one. This is the natural gas pipeline. That's the one if I want to cause damage at Campbell Industrial Park I want to take out. So thanks very much for that. I talked about the floods up in Duluth, and I talked about the barges running into Mississippi River bridges. Much of our power in the United States is coal-derived, generated. And we do that here in Hawaii. A lot of people don't realize that. And we have what is arguably the longest conveyor belt in the world. It runs from Campbell Industrial Park out to Electric Point, where the generating plant is. It's a commercial plant. And the coal is stockpiled in Campbell Industrial Park. So when the Mississippi River gets closed down, or there's flooding in Duluth, which is where a lot of the coal barges load, we run the risk here of running out of power because Honolulu runs at almost maximum power against their generator assets all the time. If we lose a generator system, we can end up with a significant power shortage that would cause brownouts and blackouts and things. Well, if you look, this incredibly impressive conveyor belt is right over this industrial road that very large dump trucks go up and down all day long, hauling bulk cargo from the port into wherever on the island. If one of them doesn't put their bed all the way down and wax that, we're going to have a problem, and there's no protection for it. And I have pointed this stuff out to the authorities who own these things, and of course nothing's happened because I'm just a moron. So when I talked about single point failures, Campbell Harbor has one entrance, one exit. Honolulu Harbor has one entrance, one exit. In addition, Honolulu Harbor is a dredged entrance, so it has tremendous shallows on either side, so you don't have options for coming in depending on where the disaster happens. So it's a significant problem for us if something happens to one of those harbors. The runways here, we have two choke points, single taxiway here, single taxiway here. The heavy lift aircraft can only launch from this runway. They can't launch from the inside runways. It's not long enough. There are 4 culverts under this that you can see at low tide. It'd be very easy to float an explosive under there and take it out. Oh, by the way, there's fiber optic cable running through this. All of it from the open source. I'm not going to talk more about cargo, except to point out that most of your perishable stuff in the United States, like refrigerated medicines and those kinds of things, comes by DHL, UPS, and FedEx. Now this you'll be more interested in. We've all watched what's been going on with Stux and Duke and Flame in the last few weeks. So these SCADA systems are becoming a big deal. They were a big deal before, but nobody was paying attention, but now people are scared. And so we're going to see a lot of opportunities, I think, in this part of the marketplace to start making a difference in how people view those systems and how they're hooked up to them. The good news is the HECO system here is so old that it's on like 96 watt modems. So I think a 9600 watt modem. So I think we're okay. Cyber threats from identity theft. I collect data on identity theft for another client for healthcare, and it has become incredibly common for healthcare information to get ripped off and they get used, not just stolen, which a lot of it happens, but it gets ripped off and used. And I've had it happen to me twice. And right now I have 3 different companies that are monitoring my credit reports because I've had data sets somewhere in the world stolen that my stuff was on. I haven't had anything happen to me yet, but it's just a matter of time. And then amazingly, there are still lots and lots of fax machines around that use these long tapes that leave the image on the tape, and people just take these when they fill up and throw them in the rubbish. They've got all sorts of individually identifiable personal information on them, and I found them in garbage bins before. So not doing a good service to business resiliency to our clients. Now here's the One Wilshire building. This is the, now this is a 1988, no fiber. This is just copper in here, but they had a fire in this telephone exchange in Hinsdale, Illinois. So this is where the fire was. This is the area that was blacked out. It also blacked out both Midway and O'Hare because their feeds to their remote stations went through this exchange. If I take that exact block and lay it on Honolulu, recognizing that the 808 exchange is just down at Veritania and Bishop Street, you can see how much of the city would lose telephone exchange if it was just this much damage, as opposed to, say, that whole building coming down. So multi-threading becomes, for your comms, becomes a big issue, and you need to be aware of that. I was talking to some folks over dinner last night. These sharks love the fiber optic cable that they run under the ocean. And the TAT-8 was actually taken out by a shark attack. It ripped the cover off and destroyed it. Now the good news is the repeaters require power, and so they're copper sheathing the cable to run the power out. Well, the sharks don't like that power. So they sense it with those little spidey sense things they've got in their heads. And so they don't attack them anymore. But that was a huge problem initially, was them eating that. And then on the mainland, we don't have much trouble with this, but here's where a beaver decided that the cable was in their way. What's more common is the knucklehead with the backhoe, who takes out the fiber optic cable, and there's lots of that. But this is old, but that just gives you a sense of some of the fiber that's under the ocean out here. Now, you may remember a George Bush 43 story about the library tower being, the tallest building west of the Mississippi, and how it, was a target of concern. Well, what was really the target of concern that he didn't talk about was one Wilshire is right here. Library tower is right here. So it's basically 2 blocks away. So if something happens like a 9/11 on the library tower because somebody decides to take out the tallest building west of the Mississippi, the one Wilshire Communications Hotel in Los Angeles that Honolulu relies on becomes a target. And we have the same thing in the Westin building in Seattle, which is another comm hotel that Honolulu uses. Most of you didn't know that. This is where our cable comes ashore on down here from Honolulu. By the way, that's, as you saw on that map before, the San Onofre nuclear power plant. This is within that circle if the San Onofre blows up. This was the Taiwan earthquake in 2006. It was a slide rather than a slip earthquake. When it slid, it severed the fiber optic cables. And it took out 98% of the comms in Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand. So, okay, sucks to be them. Well, that load doesn't go away. It jumps onto other systems. And Honolulu was impacted as the packets went looking for paths and started coming this way, looking for paths to get around the world to the other side because they couldn't get through this. So those are all things that you need to know about and pay attention to. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about all these subsectors within here. There's stuff, anybody who's been to a Super Bowl knows it's like getting put in prison because of the security. But let me talk about the Mall of America, which I think is a good model for what I would do if were I wanting to make a huge impact. So all of this information is off the web. I know how many security officers they have. I know how many closed-circuit TVs, call boxes, telephones, and payphones. I'm pretty amazed they still have payphones, by the way. So here's all the statistics about the mall. Does everybody know where Mall of America is? It's right outside of Minneapolis, largest mall in the United States. There's their crack security team. So doing the math here, those are Paul Blart and Walter. Doing the math, they've got about a maximum of 33 security officers per shift. Mostly what they do is lost kids and that kind of stuff. The only requirement to be a mall guard there is you have to have a high school diploma or equivalent, passing kind of degree in your physical. So it's not well guarded. So here's all the things they spend time on. Box fender vendors, lost children, all that kind of stuff. So they're not paying attention to what I would characterize as real security. So I did some analysis and some math. There's a food court which would likely have a lot of people in it because it's the stuff we're not supposed to eat. And it's at this end of the mall. There's a surface parking lot here, and the state route ramp to the 494 to the airport is right here. So having driven it, you can literally scare everybody. And then they don't go to malls. I'm not going to talk about government buildings. We've talked a lot about the hazards, but I've got the list of them here. Risk to first responders. National icons. We've heard a lot about those lately with risk. People claiming to put bombs in there. Whether it's accidental or intentional, the risk to us is the same. He went away, but he got replaced, so that didn't help us. Economic terror. I was in Washington, D.C. when the snipers were around and completely negatively impacted commerce in the city. Improvising Devices. That book you see up there, I have that book for building bombs, which I found at an antique store. Now, you're all going like, I can find all that stuff on the web. Yeah, you also leave footprints where you went to get it, and now they can track you down. Guess what? Nobody knows I have this book except 300 or 400 people who I give this lecture to. So there's easy ways to figure out how to build bombs. So let me talk about analytical risk management. We use these terms interchangeably. Threat, risk, and vulnerability are very different. The threat is some kind of unwanted event. Those are the things I've been through that you could happen to as unwanted events. You can objectify those using this analytical risk management model. It's available on the web. It's not proprietary. You can see the contingency planning management website has it. So you can go through and you can make an assessment for your client. Same is true of vulnerabilities. Those are the things that would be most impacted